Mark Madsen, former Utah State Senator and medical marijuana advocate, and Michelle McOmber, CEO of the Utah Medical Association. Thank you both for being part of Three Questions.
You bet.
Thanks for having us.
The agreement appears to be a sincere effort on both sides of the Proposition 2 issue to come together to help patients that need medical marijuana. But how can those patients be certain, and how can they trust that the legislature is going to produce some meaningful legislation that will bring them some relief in a timely manner after so many years of not doing that? Michelle.
You know, I think they can be assured of that because, you know, when you look at it, the people that were in the room looking at this issue, the Speaker of the House, other members of the Senate, the proponents, members from the proponent side, members from the opposition side, you know, we really sat down and looked at each individual issue and came together on all of those things that we could agree on. And it is an effort to try to come to an agreement on medical cannabis. And, you know, we were never apart on medical cannabis. We were just apart on what Proposition 2 was. And how could we get there in a way that would be safe for patients and that would be safe for Utah? And so I think, you know, we really are trying to find the best way for Utah to move forward on this. And again, I think the Senate, we've really seen a commitment from the Senate side and the House side to move forward on this. And the governor's office also was involved in this.
Okay, we see that in the leadership, but Mark, how do you get the rest of the legislature on board?
Well, you're right. There are no guarantees in politics. So you always want to have, play your strongest hand and have an insurance policy if you can. I hope that in the end, because something is going to pass after the elections, after the people speak, and I hope it's what was proposed today, the language that was proposed today. But lots of things can happen between now and then. Despite good intentions, sometimes things go awry. So even though it might be likely that that passes, I think the best thing to do is have an insurance policy and, if possible, to do something to keep the people that made promises, keep them honest. And I understand there's mistrust and why there's a lot of doubt that people will follow through on their promises up in the legislature and other institutions that have weighed in on this. So let's all hope for the best. But let's plan for having an insurance policy. Let's have Prop 2 pass, hopefully pass overwhelmingly, so we have a bird in the hand. And then if the birds in the bush produce, if they materialize, then so much the better. And great that everyone's been around the table to look down the road and see what that would look like. But there are no guarantees in politics. Anybody that's been involved at all knows that.
From where each of you sit, now that the agreement is on the table, what challenges lie ahead from the UMA's side and from the medical marijuana advocacy side?
I think the challenge from the advocate side, from the patient side, is preserving the language that's there. What has been done, and I, again, earlier today, many times have said that the work product is fantastic. If I had been presented with this as an option when I was in the legislature, if the people that were working against my bill at the time had come up with something meaningful like this, I would have taken it up in a heartbeat because it works. And so I'm pleased that we're here. But I'm concerned that, again, on follow-through, as you've mentioned, and protecting the language. And there's been a lot of, you know, intimation that we're going to go back in and change this. And I think that the agreement amongst the principles is that we're not going to do substantial changes to this. We're going to, if there's something that looks like it's going to do damage to the program and the intention of patients getting their medicine, then we can go in and make minor changes to make sure that doesn't happen. But I think if we can protect, again, keep people to what they promised to support today, I think is the watchword for anybody who's an advocate and wants to see this all the way through. It was depicted today that this is the beginning, and it might be the beginning of the next round. So let's make sure that Prop 2 passes. I believe it's a better bill. I think there are, and it's an interesting dichotomy. I think what's been proposed for after Prop 2 is better in some ways in that it actually has more conditions. It opens up the conditions. It makes the protections for patients between the time it passes and the time that the program is fully implemented much more comprehensive. So I like those aspects, but on balance, I think the Prop 2 is better for patients. I think it eliminates some of the cost drivers that we find in the bill that's been negotiated here, and a lot of the inconvenience that's the burden that's placed on patients to get their medicine in return every 14 days and so forth. So I think, again, the important thing is to have an insurance policy, pass the piece of legislation before us, and hope for the best. And in doing so, protect the language and the commitments and the promises that were made today to stick to the language that has been presented to the public now and not go back in the back door. That's what the people don't want to see, is somebody going in the back door now and undermining that, inserting a poison pill, watering it down somehow. So that's the challenge.
Michelle, from your standpoint, what are the challenges now that the agreement is on the table?
Well, I mean, first I'd have to agree with Mark, or disagree with Mark on Proposition 2. It is not a better proposition. This bill that has been negotiated has had both sides sitting down and negotiating it. And not only both sides, as I mentioned, you have had the House there, you have had the Senate there, you have had the governor's office there looking at this issue and really going through it. Not only that, you have had all these other agencies that have had a chance to look at it and put input into this particular bill. And so when you've already had that many eyes looking at it, you already have had the chance to make those changes that need to be made to the bill in many ways already. And so to say that, you know, that this is not the way that we're going to go forward, I think that a lot of the things that needed to be negotiated in this bill have already been negotiated in this bill. Whereas if you Proposition 2, nobody has negotiated on that bill at all, on that ballot initiative. And a lot of things would need to be fixed in Proposition 2. So you don't have to go back to the physician every 14 days, by the way. I know that inside and out. You don't.
To the dispensary.
No, you actually don't.
Or to the pharmacy.
No, you actually don't. But regardless, this bill, again, has had many, many eyes look at it, not just those who were in the room negotiating it, spending many, many hours going over each line and each word and each everything to say, you know, how will this work? And theoretically, how will it work? In practice, how will it work? What can we do going forward on this? And how can we make this medicine? And how can we work for patients? Or how can we make it work for patients? You know, we very, very carefully have crafted this to go forward. And so, you know, again, many eyes have looked at it, including different parts of law enforcement and everything else. So we have a bill that many different agencies have looked at in addition to those who are in the room.
Right now, the polls are swinging toward passage of Proposition 2. In the event that it does pass in the election in November, what happens from both of your perspectives? Michelle, what happens?
Well, again, I think as mentioned today in the press conference, I think that we work forward with this compromise that we have already put forward. This is the one to work forward on because, as mentioned, you know, even if Prop 2 passes, there are many, many people who are against it. There are many people who are for it. And it's going to be a huge war, a huge fight down the road. We don't want to see that huge war and huge fight. We want to see people working together on this issue. We want to see us go forward in a way that makes sense. We want to see us go forward in a way that makes sense for patients, but doesn't bring recreational marijuana into the state of Utah. We want to go forward in a way that works for Utah and that puts the controls in place, etc. So we want to move forward. And it will move forward in the way that we have already put forward in this compromise bill.
Mark, if Proposition 2 passes, what happens?
I think we agree that prospectively, what has been discussed today, the so-called compromise bill, will be the law in Utah. We hope that happens. And again, I'm impressed with what's been done, and I see the work that's gone in there. I'm so thrilled that people that until a few weeks ago were working against the principles that are embodied in this piece of legislation have now essentially done a 180 and come so far my direction. I mean, we started with two bills. One I described was of, by, and for patients. The other was of, by, and for government. There is an interesting mix now, but I see it as 85% by, for, and of patients, and then there's what I call silliness and some extra cost. So I'm pleased. Again, I would have taken the deal if had it been offered, especially in the spirit it's offered now, with the people willing to come to the table that are at the table now. That's what's refreshing about this, is that the people that for years had said nothing but no and we're not going to engage have in the last few weeks apparently found a way to get around the same table, have meaningful conversation, and the result has been a dramatic move from the pro-government versus pro-person, and it's much more pro-patient. So I just think your first question was, do we think it's going to happen? I hope it happens. I'd like to say maybe I think it will happen, that this gets passed the way it's been proposed. But there are no guarantees. I don't think that Prop 2 is ever going to be the long-term law of Utah. But it is an insurance policy. If it doesn't pass and the legislature fails to follow through and the suspicions of the people are realized, at least that's in place and patients are protected. And if it passes and the legislature follows through, then we all have a bill that we know we can live with. But I think at the same time, passing it, and especially overwhelmingly, kind of makes it even more likely that the legislature will follow through, because they'll feel that extra push from the people. And hopefully at the same time, the people can send the message with the vote for yes on Prop 2 is a vote for no on business as usual. We can't forget that we're at this point now because of all of the negative things that have happened leading up to now, and all of the contention that has been churned up, all of the tactics that have been used. And so I'd rather, look forward and say we're going to have a great law, but not fail to learn from what we've gone through and the pain that has been inflicted on the state because of choices that have been made by people that are involved in this conversation, so that hopefully the next time something comes up, there can be immediate engagement instead of the attitude, as long as we think we can kill it in the crib, we will. And that's hopefully a lesson we can learn looking forward, and we can have a better politic in Utah for having gone through this painful experience.
Canada is in the process of legalizing recreational marijuana. 8 states in the United States, it's legal. Countries around the world are legalizing recreational marijuana. Is that where Utah is headed? And if so, is that a bad thing?
I hope we're not headed that way. That is what we are absolutely against. That is why we don't like Proposition 2. And what we are looking at is passing medical marijuana in the state of Utah, not recreational marijuana in the state of Utah. When we see recreation in the other states, in Colorado and some of those other states, we see huge problems. We see huge problems with use by youth. We see what that does to the youth in those states. And we see increases in traffic fatalities. We see increases in the emergency room visits. We see all sorts of increases that we don't want to see in the state of Utah. And so that is why we are carefully crafting this bill, to make it so that it is more like medicine, and that it is medicine when we bring it into the state of Utah, and that it's not recreation. And I don't think Utahns want to see recreation either. I mean, if you have seen the polls, it is not where Utah wants to head.
Mark?
I don't think it'll ever happen in Utah, or if it does, it'll be because the federal government overtakes the state policy. But I would like to suggest that it's a false statement to say that Prop 2 is recreational, not by a long shot. I mean, that's just misleading. Many of the things that have been revamped in this bill are kind of like a belt and suspenders. The protections were already there. To suggest that they weren't is simply ludicrous, and not true to the past. And again, if it takes belt and suspenders to make certain people happy, I guess that's the sausage that we grind to get to where we need to get. But the suggestion that this was some kind of a free-for-all, I mean, it was the most restrictive of any of the medical cannabis laws. And I would also take serious issue with some of the studies that are put forth by primarily law enforcement on outcomes in other states. Maybe look beyond those studies, and you'll find data that doesn't necessarily portray the crumbling of society that opponents like to portray. But as far as your question, I don't think that is what Utah wants. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that it's kind of like gambling for people who want to do it. They have Nevada. And so, as long as people are free to travel, I think the market will seek its own level. And it's a completely different question. This is about getting medicine to patients. I mean, how can a recreational bill have 9 conditions that you have to be diagnosed by a physician, recommended? I mean, again, if it makes them feel better to have belt and suspenders, and that's what it takes, that's fine. I'm afraid in some instances it raises the cost. But Prop 2 is not recreational, far from it. And I think that's part of kind of the disingenuous tactic I'm talking about when people make conclusory statements like that aren't based in reality, assign motives to other people like this. These people want big cannabis and these people want recreational. I think that taints the conversation and is not good. It's just unproductive, and I wish it would stop.
I have to disagree with him on what you said about Prop 2. I'll give you examples of why we say it's recreational. When the only involvement by a medical provider is to recommend a card, and then the patient goes into a dispensary and picks from whatever product they want and whatever the person behind the counter will sell them or convinces them to buy, that's recreational. That is not medical. And that is how Prop 2 is written. So, we will have to agree to disagree on what Proposition 2 is, but we have read through it and read through it and read through it and read through it, and we did not come out against Proposition 2 because it was medical. We came out against Proposition 2 because of that there were not enough controls in there, and it did not look enough like medicine to be medicine.
Well, I mean, if you want to redefine the meaning of recreational, I guess you can make any argument that you want. It's interesting to me this reliance on medically trained professionals as if they know something about this issue, because one thing we do know is that the traditional education of medical professionals meticulously avoids any kind of instruction on the endocannabinoid system or cannabis as a medicine. So we're relying on people that are specifically not taught about this. And so to suggest that a pharmacist dropping in out of pharmacy school is going to know more than somebody that has been treating patients in other states with this medicine that until recently was not even recognized as a medicine by the people that are now supposed to be dispensing it, it becomes a circular argument. One of the things I don't like about legislation is special legislation that benefits a particular trade group or so forth. But again, if that's what it takes to get patients medicine, I'm willing to sign on. And that's why I'm here. I think the work product is good enough. And so let's move forward with it. If there's a consensus, if this means people are going to call the dogs off, hopefully we can de-escalate some of the disinformation. I think those are all positive things. That's why I'm here. But I just hope we can learn the lessons from what we've seen before and judge people's credibility based on their behaviors in the past moving forward so that we don't fall back into the same kind of misery that the state has gone through in the last few months.
Let me ask this question because it leads, what you've been saying leads to it, and that is this. Should patients who use medical marijuana be allowed to self-regulate their doses?
No.
Why not?
Because that is just, then it isn't medicine. If patients are self-regulating their doses, it's not part of a medicine system. That's like saying that anything that you take, you could self-regulate. If we're going to call it medicine, then it does need to be dosed, and it does need to be controlled by the medical system. And if it's not, then we need to say that it's something else, and we need to go forward with something else. But if we're calling it medicine, and if we're going to follow through on saying that this is medicine, and it's going to go through this dosage process and everything else, then they shouldn't be able to self-medicate. The problem is, too, is that many of these individuals, because we're talking about serious illnesses, right, they're going to be on other medications. And you need to know exactly what dose the patient is on so you can see the interactions, the contraindications, the interactions with the other medications, and everything else that happens with the patient. And that's very important in treating these patients.
Mark?
Well, I do think that it would be appropriate to allow patients to do what they do with other pharmaceutical products and have a sticker that says, take one every so often as needed and then you decide as needed. I mean, I think that's a legitimate, if you don't trust patients to know, especially over time, when they've been using a product for over a period of time, they've been able to try the various strains and the various forms, then to deny them the opportunity to take that knowledge and administer it themselves betrays a very fundamental difference of ideology about who makes decisions, owns their life, and owns those choices. Is it the individual, or is it the government bureaucracy, being represented by doctors and pharmacists that have to get licenses from and so it's, I mean, we'll never, I guess, agree on that. But I do think that the idea, I came to cannabis after having been prescribed a lot of pharmaceuticals from the, mainstream medicine. And I was repeatedly told to, try this, try any number of these things, go home and see how it feels, take as needed, take it, and if we can't have the same kind of respect and treat it as medicine in the same way and allow patients the same discretion, especially for something that has no upper end on the therapeutic index. You can't overdose on it. All of these other micromanaging things that you get in traditional pharmacy is because virtually every other substance, I think every other substance prescribed, even aspirin, has a therapeutic index that says it's the difference between an effective dose and a lethal dose. There is no lethal dose of cannabis. And so you're applying standards that fit to pharmaceuticals where you're trying to avoid a lethal dose, and you're saying, let's apply this to something that has no lethal dose. So, again, some of this, I think, comes from ignorance as to what cannabis is and isn't. And that comes from, years of propaganda and so forth. But we really need to push past that and get to understand the similarities and the differences and just say, look, we're not going to call a cat a dog and live with it. Not all pharmaceutical things are the same. We need to be smart enough to recognize the differences, smart enough to recognize that the medical community has been an ivory tower that has been isolated, federally prohibited, and that's not their fault, from acquiring any knowledge about this. Now to expect that they're going to be the experts is ludicrous. I mean, they can get up to speed and we welcome them on board, but let's not, overemphasize a credential and assume that they know things that they don't.
Every medication does not lead to death, okay? Let's make that very clear. Does not. So that is not true. And, by the way, when it says take as needed, it also gives you an amount and says do not take more than a certain amount. So take as needed says 1 to 2 tablets, says whatever. So there is a dosing amount included in that, and that's what we're talking about when we say that.
Okay. Well, none of us are doctors, but, on the therapeutic index thing, think that, most pharmaceuticals have a lethal dose. If there are exceptions, they're...
Not even most. We'll just stop it there.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, none of us are doctors, so okay. I'm not going to try and die on that hill.
How much of the conflict between these two sides that you both represent, how much of that conflict is caused by the fact that marijuana remains a Schedule I substance? And what can be done about that?
I think quite a bit of the conflict is caused by that. We've been asking for years to have it rescheduled to Schedule II. Because if it were rescheduled to Schedule II, you would see a lot of different scenarios with it as a medicine. And if you saw those scenarios, as you do with other medicines, you wouldn't have this kind of a dialogue or conflict happening.
I think that oftentimes people who want conflict on this issue turn to that as a club that they try to beat people over the head with. And it's interesting to have some people who are so eager to protest and resist against federal encroachment. All of a sudden, there's a slavish devotion to federal regulation when it comes to this issue. But I think it would be much easier. Consistently, it's interesting. You've got a bureaucracy that has a stranglehold on the policy. And you've had both branches of government in D.C., the legislature and the president at various times cut funding, demand that it be re-examined and rescheduled, issue memos that they can't spend resources enforcing in medical cannabis states. All of these things, but you've got one stubborn law enforcement bureaucracy that won't let go and won't schedule it. And you go dig deep into their files, and you find that these things have gone through reviews. I think the last one was in 1988, where they ask all their internal people to do a review, should it be rescheduled? And all along the lines, the recommendation is yes, up until it gets to the political law enforcement types, and they quash it every time. So we've got It should be. It should have been a long time ago. If you go back into the history, it never should have been scheduled that way to begin with. It was the people in the medical community that protested it back in the day. But it should be rescheduled. But the fact of the matter is, and this is what I've been arguing, we can't wait to give relief to patients until the federal government gets its act together. And those who say, oh, we have to wait, I think they're looking for a reason, and they glom onto that sometimes if it serves them at the moment. But, it does need to be done, but it's not a justification for inaction now.
In Utah, we take a lot of pride. I know the leaders take a lot of pride, and we report on it in the news, that Utah becomes an example of things that work. And you can see that in economics, you can see it in business, you can see it in welfare and that kind of thing. Do either of you suppose that this will become an example of something that really works? I'm talking about the compromise agreement that is going before the legislature in regard to medical marijuana. Are you optimistic, Mark? Again, a little less so based on the new language. Very optimistic. Everything that we put in there about cultivation from the beginning is basically intact. Everything we put in there about processing from the beginning is basically intact. There might be, again, belt and suspenders, but it's there. The condition list is actually expanded since I was there, so that's good in both bills. There's more conditions. It's tough to tell. Michelle?
I think so. I think so. Obviously, we've crafted it that way, that we hope that it can be an example to other states in the way to do it in the right way, in the way to put enough controls on it that it is medicine and not recreation, in a way to protect children and not see some of the other problems that we've seen in some of the other states. So we hope so going forward. We would hope that is it. And we've tried to, again, you say Utah has crafted many unique solutions, and we think that's what we're doing here.
Do either of you find it ironic that so much has been made of legalizing a plant that has been demonized for decades, and as far as we can see, appears not to be nearly as harmful as tobacco or alcohol? Do either of you find that ironic?
Mm-hmm. I'll let Mark go first because I have something to say about that. It is a unique issue in a lot of ways. And you have to dig into the history. You have to go back to the 1930s and William Randolph Hearst and Oxlinger and the enforcement bureaucracy that was unemployed after Prohibition and all of the things that went into making the policy that we have today, and a lot of it was very ugly. The kind of stuff that William Randolph Hearst was involved in. But anyway, and it missed the mark. Government screwed it up. And now we're coming around to that. It's very painful for some people to admit that government did wrong. If you've spent your whole life, based on an ideology that this is bad and we have to take it from people, and now you realize that you've been taking medicine from people that could have made it better, it's got to be tough. And it is ironic, and there's a lot of other words to describe that, but it's unique. It's unique in the way that the states have pushed back against the federal government. A lot of the dynamics that have come to play here are unparalleled in Utah politics and in the U.S. politics. But it is, with the overlay of federalism and the states pushing back, it is, aside from being important to me personally as a patient and substantively for the people, it is fascinating to watch watch the states assert their independence from federal policy that is now so widely recognized to be misguided. So there's a lot of things that are interesting. Irony is one of them.
Michelle.
Yeah, so the reason I wanted to have Mark go first is because I wanted to look at this study from the AAA, right? So you talked about alcohol. Researchers found that the problem with, and the reason we need to bring it into Utah very carefully, and this is why I state this, if a driver is under the influence of alcohol, the risk of fatal crash is 13 times higher than the risk of the driver who is not under the influence of alcohol, right? But if the driver is under the influence of both alcohol and marijuana, the risk increases to 24 times that of a sober person. So we know that it does affect your ability to drive.
If you're drunk, yeah.
Well, this is marijuana too, right? This is what we're talking about.
Standalone marijuana? Or is it
Fatal crashes involving drivers who recently used marijuana doubled in Washington after the state legalized the drug, etc. So we are talking that this does have an effect on your body's ability to react, etc. So it is something that affects the way your body reacts to things. So it's important that we do this in the right way, right? So you're comparing it to alcohol. It's different than alcohol, but it does affect the way your body reacts to, how it reacts to driving, the way your times for stopping, all sorts of things. So, we need to do this in a very careful way going forward.
I think my point is that both tobacco and alcohol are completely legal in this country. Of course, driving under the influence is not legal,
right,
of course. But we've got at least two substances, and then you throw in the opioid issue.
I wonder what the statistics are on that.
Well, and you've got all kinds of...
But people thought they were safe to begin with, right?
Right.
So that's what we're saying.
The medical community told us they were.
Well, that's what we're saying. We're saying, so people think marijuana is safe. People are saying it's safe, but we're seeing increasing problems. So we need to do it in a careful way.
Right. And so my question is about the irony of us making so much of this legalization issue when we've got substances that are legal right now that absolutely contribute to danger and death and risk. And so that's my question, is whether that is an irony to either one of you, that we're making so much of this when these other substances we know create
but it's the same
terrible
thing,
problems.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't know originally that cigarettes were as harmful as they were, right? We didn't know that.
Right.
We discovered that later, and we discovered more and more and more over the years. Yeah. So that's why we're saying, if we are going to legalize in Utah, that's what we're doing in moving forward, legalize this drug in Utah. We need to do it in a very careful, eyes wide open way in doing this, and make sure that we are putting parameters around it where we are protecting kids, we are protecting the communities, and we are doing it for medical uses only.
All right. Mark Madsen, former Utah State Senator and advocate for medical marijuana, thank you. And Michelle McOmber, CEO of Utah Medical Association, thank you both.
Thank you.
For being part of 3 Questions.
Thank you.